Hello, everybody. I'm essentially going to talk you through the contents of this slide in a prolonged manner. So what I'm particularly talking about is how a trial starts from just being an idea all the way through to either a drug or a diet or a procedure becoming licensed and used for the general population. So all of the steps in between, and particularly where you would potentially come in as participants. So the very first step is that a doctor or a researcher has an idea that they would like to test. So it could be from previous experience, it could be from patient groups, it could come from previous lab data that they have, and it could involve new treatment, combining drugs together in a way that's not been done before, using a drug that's already available for a different condition, or testing a new way of giving an existing treatment. So, for example, an injection instead of a tablet. And the slides are geared towards pharmaceuticals because that's the easiest to explain, but the same processes are also followed for other treatments. So diets and things along those lines, and also for new investigations, the same process follows. So they will have an idea that they want to use a particular type of scan for a new condition. The same process will follow. Once they've had this idea, then they will write a detailed plan called a protocol. So protocols are what I receive from a pharmaceutical company, and it's how the trial takes place. It does contain a lot of information. They're usually 200-300 pages of very small font with no pictures. And it details why the trial is being taken place, who will be able to take part. So this is the criteria that people must have and the criteria that people must not have to be able to take part in the study, how many people they want, what the treatments are, and quite often it will list existing treatments as well if there are any as a comparison, what tests people will have to go through and how many appointments they will have to attend. And for me as a doctor, it lists exactly what I need to do every time I make contact with that participant. It will tell me what procedures are expected of me at that time. And it also details how they plan to analyse the results, what statistical tests they're going to use, and what data they want to see to allow them to determine whether or not their idea has actually worked. Then the next step is for someone else to check it. So it's all very well and good Dr. A having a fantastic idea, but if doctors B, C, and D think it's rubbish, it's not going to go forward. So this is called a peer review. So this is people who are also experts in that field. So other doctors, researchers, statisticians will check the protocol to make sure that the research is valid. So it's an important question that actually needs answering. It's not just some whim that someone has got. Whether or not you'll actually be able to find people to take part. So there's no point in having a fantastic protocol if actually it's so hard to get onto it that no one's ever going to take part. Is there anything that they've not written down? So is there anything that's going to be a risk or a difficulty within the study that they've just not thought of? And also if the statistical plan is suitable and if it's going to give them the results that they need in order to progress to the next stage. Now, the next part is the money part. So all of these trials, as we discussed last week, they cost millions to run these trials. Money is a big part of this, and they need to get funding to run the trial, and usually that comes in the form of a sponsor. What we mean by a sponsor is the person that's essentially going to fund the trial. That can be a charity. So some of the larger charities that do, millions of pounds worth of fundraising, they will sponsor studies for their particular disease areas. The government will sponsor some studies, and particularly recently, the COVID vaccination studies will have had some government sponsorship. And then pharmaceutical companies themselves will be sponsors. So they will pay for those studies to be run. Sponsors they then also manage the trial. So they then are the people that basically tell me what to do from on high. And that can be an organisation, it's usually an organisation, or an individual if you've got someone that's wealthy enough. And sometimes it's more than one organisation or individual and you have co-sponsors. And it ensures that myself and other researchers follow the regulations that are required. So they make sure that we follow their protocol, and we make sure that we follow the ethical guidelines to ensure that the participants on the study are safe and the data that they get is what they need. When you get to the next point, we now have to make sure it's ethical. So this is the first time it's now gone outside of scientific experts. So the plan and the protocol will be reviewed by an ethics committee. So the ethics committee, or REC, so that's a regional ethics committee, will be up to 15 people, and they are not directly involved in the trial. There will be some medical people within the ethics committee, scientific people, but mostly it's lay people. So it's people who do not work in that area. And they look to make sure that the protocol is important to patients as well. Rather than just being a scientific question, it's actually important to the people involved. They look at how participants will be recruited onto the study to make sure that they feel that that is ethical. They make sure that the benefits to the participants are greater than the risks, and we'll talk about risks and benefits of trials a little bit later. They make sure that the trial research team, so that's me and my team, are adequately qualified. So I have to be ethically approved to take part in a study as well by submitting my CV and my qualifications. They will then say whether or not they are happy with me running a particular study. They check that a peer review has appropriately been completed. And they also check that all of the information that's going to be patient-facing is written in a suitable language that participants will be able to understand. There is no point having a patient information sheet that just contains medical jargon. If then during the course of the study, if a protocol is altered for any reason, so say they decide to add in extra assessments, make the trial longer, take assessments away, all of those changes will also be reviewed by an ethics committee. They must be informed if anyone has any unexpected side effects that are serious. So anyone that's admitted to hospital, if an investigator feels that that's potentially related to the study treatment, the drug company has to inform the ethics committee of that, and they monitor that. And if there starts to become a pattern, they can then say the study has to stop. And they can stop the study at any point if they have concerns. And then once it's gone through all that, the trial becomes authorised, and they start looking at actual starting the clinical trial at the site level. So all of these things have to be, trials have to be approved in the UK by the MHRA, so the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Authority, and they give authority for us to do the trials. Trials can take place in multiple settings. You can have trials run by NHS clinics, so hospitals, general practitioners, or at clinical research organisations or CROs, which is where I work. I work in a designated CRO. All I do all day, every day, is clinical trials. If you are looking at a trial in a hospital, they have to get approval from their research department as well. The trial has the responsibility of making sure that they have enough time, equipment, resources, and experience and expertise to carry out that trial appropriately and according to the protocol. And then we all get training before the trial can start. So all of the site members that are involved in that trial will be appropriately trained, some of them by the sponsor, and then ultimately by myself, if they're not trained by the drug company and individuals. The doctor in charge of the trial will then train the rest of the staff. And all of that has happened before any of you get involved. So there's quite a lot of steps that they have to go through before we even start thinking about a participant coming on a study. There are specific criteria that participants have to meet before they can take part in a trial. That is partially to make sure that the participants are as similar as possible in terms of their age, their health, their medical conditions, their diet, previous or current treatment, and the current diagnosis and symptoms that they have. But it's also relating to safety as well. There are going to be certain things that are going to be exclusionary because of safety factors. So there may be particular medications that are not permitted on a study, or particular health problems that are not permitted on a study. And that's to keep the participants on the trial safe. Patient information sheets are given to potential participants. And that gives you a full breakdown of the trial and what is involved for you. They are quite long. They're quite often 25, 30 pages, but they go through all of the important points that you need to know about a study before you go on one. So if you are potentially interested in a study, this is one of the first stages. You will be given the patient information leaflet to go home, to have a read through, to have a chat with your family, your friends, your GP, your gastroenterologist, your oncologist, whoever you are under as a specialist. You can have a chat with them about this study to see if they think this is the right thing for you as well. And you are given plenty of time to think about the study and ask questions before making a decision if it's something that you want to do. Just because you've expressed interest in a study doesn't mean we're going to be suddenly turning up on your doorstep saying, why haven't you come? So as part of my role as a researcher, I have to discuss clinical trials with the participants that come through that I see. So I have to discuss the purpose of the study, so what they're trying to find out, the different treatments within the study, the risks and the benefits of the study, so potential side effects, potential benefits, what tests you will have during the course of the study, and how many appointments you have. That's quite a big one, especially if you're working, how often you have to come. Sometimes drug companies will want to keep tissue samples and blood samples for further research, where your appointments are going to be. So whether it's going to be purely at the research centre, whether some appointments will be done at your house, whether you will need to go to other centres to have other tests done, and importantly, who to contact if you have any questions. And that's quite often a doctor, but it may be a study nurse or a study research assistant as the first port of call. So potential benefits. For healthy participants, so some studies involve healthy participants, so people who don't have a particular condition. They're usually the earlier phase of study, and those do give you payment for your time and your inconvenience of taking part in the study. Later phase studies usually don't. It's not usually deemed ethical to pay people to take part in later phase studies. The main benefit for me is you are aiming to improve treatment for other people in the future. So you are helping to make life better for the next generation of people with whatever condition we're looking at the trial. You may only be able to get part of the medication or the treatment as part of a trial at this point, so there may be no other way of you getting that treatment. And it could work better than the standard treatment, and that's the purpose of a lot of these studies, to see if this is the next good thing. You also have more blood tests, scans, and other tests. So we do pick up quite a lot of health conditions that people don't know that they have. I've picked up heart attacks, aneurysms, tumours, through people having the screening processes for these studies. And you have checkups more often and for longer than usual. So you have quite a lot of access to a doctor, and you see a doctor quite frequently on these studies. But I think on the next slide, you're also going to see that some people might think that's a bad thing. So, drawbacks. You may have to do a bit of work on a study, I'm afraid. Some studies do involve you keeping paperwork as record of symptoms or logging symptoms online. You could have more checkups more often and for longer than usual. That could be a bad thing if your time is precious to you, or if you don't like me. You may have more blood tests and scans than normal, so you do have the risks of blood tests, and some of the scans do involve radiation, or you could have other tests that have risks associated, and all of those things will be within the patient information sheet, and they will all have been assessed by the ethics committee as still having increased benefit than risk, but it's something that you need to consider. It may cost you time and money. So for example, traveling to the centres, costs may be reimbursed, they may not. It will depend on the study, and that's a question that you should ask before you make a start on a study. And as with any treatment, you can have side effects. You can have side effects from paracetamol. So any treatment or medication that you take can have side effects. You may also not know, and you probably won't know, if you're in the active treatment group or the placebo group. So you won't necessarily know what you're taking, okay? All trial treatments have been carefully researched in laboratories before they get to the point of being in people. And by the time they certainly get to phase 3 trials, which are the ones that I usually work in, they have been trialed in groups of people before. So there is less risk of you having a significant side effect, but it is still possible, as it's still possible with any medication that you take. And we will discuss with you what side effects are potentially expected for that medication and anything in particular for you to look out for while you're on the trial. So drug companies and trial companies are insured. And if you are found to have been harmed due to something on the study, due to a problem with the medication, you will be insured for that by the clinical trial company and by the drug sponsor. That can come in many ways. So if it's an NHS trial, the NHS would also be involved in negligence and liability claims. If it's a university research study, again, the university would be involved in that. And for the actual drug itself, the pharmaceutical company would be liable if there was harm done to you by something on a trial. And we're talking significant harm. We're not talking, I had a bit of a headache afterwards and it went away after a couple of hours. So before you go on a trial, you have to sign a consent form. We can't do anything to you without your written consent. You can ask any questions you like. There is no such thing as a silly question, but you may get silly answers, particularly if you come and see me, I'm afraid. You can bring someone with you if you wish to. You don't have to, but you can do. And if you're still not happy after that conversation with the clinical trial team and there's still questions that you want to ask, or if there's other people you want to have a chat with, just say no. Everything is voluntary at every point along the line. Say, I want to go home and have another think about it. We won't do anything until you tell us that you are comfortable and happy to take part on that trial. And during the trial, please continue to ask questions and get the answers that you need. Me being nice to you doesn't stop when you sign the consent form. We carry on, hopefully, being nice to you for the entire duration of the study. So once you've actually signed the consent form, then you go through the screening process for the study. So that is where I assess whether or not you are the right participant for the trial, and also importantly, whether the trial is the right thing for you. It will involve a number of different tests depending on the study, and they vary significantly in complexity, the studies. Some just have very basic assessments like blood pressures, heart rates, temperatures. Others get slightly more complicated with blood tests, ECGs, and then you get even more complicated still with biopsies, scans, endoscopies. So it varies significantly depending on the actual trial that you are taking part in. But again, all of that information will be in the patient information sheet for that specific study. You will be given a point of contact during the course of the study. So within the patient information sheet, there will be a section on who to contact. There'll be a point of contact generally. There will also be a point of contact if you have a concern, and there will be an emergency contact, which is what I am tonight for all of the patients on the trials within my company. So that you won't be without contact. You won't be left on a limb and not knowing who to call. You can withdraw from a study at any point. You don't have to give us a reason. Please just tell them though. Some patients just go AWOL and it gets a bit frustrating because we don't know what's happened to them. So just a quick phone call. I've had enough. I want to come off the study. That's absolutely fine. That is within your rights, and it won't affect your ongoing NHS treatment or the treatment you were having before the study. It will obviously stop the study drug though. And your GP will be informed of your participation in the study. And if we do identify any health concerns as part of the study, we will also inform you, but we will also inform your GP so that they can then move forward and investigate anything that we find if required. So data monitoring. These are people who are not directly involved in the trial, but they assess all of the data that I collect as part of a study to make sure that everyone is safe, and also to make sure that the data is of the quality that's required in order to make the analysis later on. They can advise that parts of the study need to change if they feel like the data isn't good enough, or if they feel like the patient's safety is compromised. And if things don't go well, they can ask for a study and demand that a study is stopped if they feel they need to. And again, if they say a study needs to stop, the study stops. We're nearly at the end. So now that someone's gone on the study, we're now at the data analysis portion. So data analysis actually goes on throughout the course of a study. So sometimes we will get an interim data analysis where they will look and say whether or not they wish a trial to continue. And sometimes during those analyses, they might actually say that a trial needs to stop early if they've decided that it looks as though the trial isn't working, or there's a safety concern that's come up that they weren't aware of before. But once we get to an end of a trial, they will do data analysis, they will look at the outcomes that they wanted from the study, and they will determine whether or not they feel like the trial has been successful. These results are usually published either in medical journals or presented at conferences. And sometimes the results don't show what we want them to show. Sometimes it shows that actually this new treatment is no better than what was there before, or in fact isn't as good as what was there before. But all of this data still gives us information, and it stops us from continuing to go down the wrong path. So with all of these things, it's trying to find the path to the goal. And sometimes you go down a blind alley to start off with, and that trial will end, and you'll come back to the original path. And every trial that happens shapes what's going to happen in the next study. So every trial that happens, even if that one isn't a winner, it will advance the care for that condition and the care of those participants. And then finally, we get to licensing and prescribing. So this is where everyone can now start to look at getting this medication or treatment or whatever it is. If the results of the trial is positive and shows a benefit, it can be licensed. Now, this is an incredibly long and complicated process. Please don't have the data skewed by the COVID trials, I think, where drugs were coming out in very quick succession. It doesn't happen like that day to day. So sometimes trials will happen and it'll be 3, 4, 5 years before a drug actually gets as far as being licensed, because of all the data analysis that needs to happen before they get to that point. And quite often there's more than one trial that is looked at. So there may be more than one trial of the same medication happening in different places in the world with different populations. And they want to get all of that data together before they actually go and try and get this drug licensed. And in the UK, this licensing is done by the MHRA. In the US, it's the FDA. There will be equivalents throughout the world. And particular for the UK, if a drug is to be prescribed by the NHS, then they have to look at further recommendation from NICE, so the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. And they look at a multitude of factors, whether they think that that drug is beneficial for that particular population. I'm afraid money again, they look at the cost and whether they think it is financially suitable for prescription on the NHS. And they will look at the other treatments that are available and see, actually, do they think that that's better in terms of the NHS? But it's a very long process. So just because you've seen in the press that a trial has had a positive result, it doesn't mean that next week you're going to be able to get the drug. It can take several years for that to come through, unfortunately.